Adding texture to your design is a great, simple way of adding some dynamic interest to an otherwise flat layout. In this video, there's a couple of things to keep in mind whenever you work with texture. And so I want to show you that in a variety of different software. We'll start off with Photoshop, but before we start adding texture, let's talk about textures and what is appropriate and how you can find good images to work with. I've gotten and downloaded a variety of different little textures, and when you think of texture, it's all about the feel of a subject or the feel of what it looks like, even though I can't physically touch it with my hand on my screen. So it could be something that's wet and has a variety of different lights and dark mixtures to it. It can be something that's very rough or paper-like, or it can be something dry and gritty. It can be something that's natural, like clouds. Fire has its own texture. Anything can be added to your overall design. Now, if you're doing research for textured images, you can do something like Google search. So if I did some things like metal texture, be sure to add the word texture to it. That way you're not just finding a bunch of different metal pictures or things that are made of metal. And you can see this gives you a lot of different search results. So even within metal, there's brushed metal, there's more of a roughed metal, there could be rusted metal, and everything else that's in between. Now, for these images, I don't just want to find any picture. I want to find something that's high quality that I can actually use and work in. I always recommend opening up your tools and looking for the largest file size that's possible. And you can see this will give you a variety of different things to pull from. The other thing to note is you can't simply use any picture from anywhere. We don't just want to download and access those. We want to make sure they're actually open for people to be able to use. Now, if I click on a couple of these and I actually go to their website, this may take me to a place that'll offer it to be downloaded for free, or some places may actually ask you to purchase the rights to use that font, or excuse me, that picture. And if that's the case, you can do that if you want to, but if I wanted to find some free and open source ones, I can either find a website that is offering it to me for free, or I can also go under my usage rights and turn on Creative Commons licensing. This will definitely give me a set of pictures that I can use and be able to work from here. So let's say I like this one. I can do the free download, or I can right click on it and I can open it up in a new tab and be able to get it. Let's add that to my collection of textures to work from here. In this case, it's actually giving me a file format that I can't even use. So in this case, looks like I do need to do the free download version of it, prove that I'm not a robot. And now I can use this in its nice high quality form too. Let's apply this metal texture to the background in my Photoshop document. Now I'm in Photoshop, and you can automatically see on my layers panel how I've got this document built out. Everything has its own layer. I've even got a fill color layer of just that brown, and I want to add that metal texture to this brown colored background. So I'll go up to File and down to Place. In this case, we'll place and embed it. And I need to find and locate that texture that I just downloaded. In my case, here it is here. We'll say Place and give it a second to load it up. And then I can go and I can increase the size of it till it fills out the entire area. Now this is all fine and good if I wanted to keep it the native color, but since I'm in Photoshop, I can play around with my blending modes for this layer to see how it would blend with the color that's below it. If I set it to multiply, you can see it'll get darker and get rid of the lighter areas. There's different versions of this. Or if I set it to lighten or screen, you can see it'll get rid of the darker areas and keep it lighter. Or overlay, or somewhere in between. So depending on the style that you want to have, it can be much more gritty, or much softer, or even something unexpected, or anywhere in between both of those. In my case, I'm kind of liking something along this one. I like the hard light texture inside of that. Now when I do this, I can also apply textures inside of different areas. In this case, I can do it for the lettering that I have. Let's do it for the word iron up here at the top. Now there's two different methods we can establish texture inside of a particular area. The quickest way is by using a clipping mask. Let's do that. I'll apply my other texture that I have let's do the crackle texture. With this, I'm going to simply drag it into my document. You can see it's placed, and this texture is on top of layer 1, which is the iron layer. I'll even rename this iron so we can see it. To get this texture to fit inside of the word iron, with the texture selected, go up to Layer, down to Clipping Mask, and create a clipping mask. Notice now that there's an arrow pointing from here inside of the word iron, and everything that's inside of this layer fits and is clipped inside of that word. And so it works really, really well, and it actually can show up pretty good. Now if I wanted to, I need to add a little bit of a drop shadow or something inside of this to make it stand out a bit more. So I'm going to choose my iron layer, and let's open up our effects, and maybe I'll do a drop shadow. Notice that the drop shadow is being applied to the words and not necessarily the texture that's inside of it. So make sure you got the right layers selected. Maybe for this one I'll also do an outer stroke just to make it stand out a bit more. There's my stroke, and we'll set that to be something nice and dark. Let's go in something in the brown family so that shows up well. I'm liking that. Set my size to be a little bit smaller. And now iron stands out. So that's one particular way you can add a pattern or a texture inside of there. Another way is by saving your texture as an individual pattern. Let's do that for the word gym, and I'm going to add this texture inside the word gym. Now to do that, again, I'll drag it on. We'll select it. And maybe I don't want the entire thing, but I'm going to choose my selection tool. And with that correct layer selected, I'll highlight and select a large portion of that area. I can then go up to Edit and then down to Define Pattern. This will ask me to give this as a pattern name, and I'll call this my swirl texture. And we'll say OK. With that done, I can actually delete away my texture layer because I don't need it anymore. And let's choose my gem layer here. If I open up my effects, one of the effects that I can do is to add a pattern overlay. With pattern overlay selected, you can see you can choose whatever pattern that you want. And in our case, I want to add on that new pattern that I just created of the swirl, and it's placed inside of here. Again, if I need to, since I'm in my layer style selection, I can move it around and I can place it right where I want it to be, or I can even scale it up and down depending on the needs of my design. Now if I wanted to change the color of this is where we also need to do a color overlay and then change it to be whatever color you want it to be. In this case, maybe I want it to be more of a lighter yellow, and then change your blending mode to something that will blend in with the colors that are underneath here. In this case, maybe we'll do a simple color overlay to give it that, or I could do hue, which will pick up on something else in between there. This is where you really need to play around with your blending modes and see what results that it gives you. Sometimes it'll give you something that's worth working with, and sometimes maybe not. Maybe in this case I'll also give it an outer stroke, and on that drop shadow that was done at the top one as well. And we'll say OK to that. So now I've taken an otherwise flat design and I've added some great texture in it, all that done in Photoshop. The other thing you can do is also do this inside of Illustrator if you're working in Adobe Illustrator. So I've got it set up here, and we can use some of the same textures that we did. Of course, the fastest way to do this is to drag on the texture. So in our case, I'll take my metal texture, place it inside of my InDesign or my Illustrator file. Let's make it larger so I can see this working area. When I placed it, you can see it was way too big, but that's okay. We'll send it to the background, let it cover up this entire area. With it selected, I'm going to go up to Object and Arrange. Let's send it all the way to the back. Now that this texture is behind the brown area, I can choose my brown rectangle and go over to my opacity and change the blending mode. I can set it to whatever blending mode I want it to be in order to blend in with that background. If I want to set a texture inside of my font or my type, again, we can add on our texture. In this case, maybe I'll do it to the paper texture. Drag it on, jump in. We need to scale it down so that we can see it and actually have it fit well. So let's zoom back in. Now here's the tricky part. I've got this created and selected, but these are 4 different designs. So I've got the I, the R, O, and N. All of those are 4 different things. I want to treat this as one unit, and I don't just want to group it. I actually want to see this as one individual object. So with all of them selected, go up to Object and down to Compound Path and choose Make. Now that it's a compound path, this is going to treat everything as one solid object. And I'm going to take my artwork and I'm going to send it behind the word iron. So notice iron is on top and here's this below it. When I select my words and my picture, both of those are selected. I can go up to Object, down to Clipping Mask and choose Make. And now it'll be clipped inside of that area. And that only works if you've got this created as a compound shape and the texture or the texture is behind it as well. Now if I need to move my texture around, all I need to do is double click on it. This will go into isolation mode and this will allow me to select the picture inside of it and move the picture around. And I can even scale it down and rotate it, do whatever I need to place it inside of here as well. If I double click, this will go outside. That'll place in there. In this case, it's not easily seen, but that's one way of adding texture to your design in here. In Illustrator, it's just a little bit more difficult to do that. Just like in Photoshop, you can save things up as patterns, but in Illustrator, patterns need to be vector versions of whatever you have. Let's do that for the word gem. So I've got gem selected. Maybe I'll change its fill color to be something brown. Let's make it a different color so we can see it. Maybe not brown. Let's do pink, hot pink. If I wanted to add a pattern or a repeating texture to this, I can open up my swatches panel, and down at the bottom, there's a variety of different swatches that we have. But in our case, we want to choose some repeating patterns. And there's some defined ones that are already in here. For instance, there's lines, textures, decorative elements, even some natural type ones as well. If I chose something like the basic graphic ones, let's do some graphic textures. This will open up a separate texture panel from here. Now if I choose these textures, it's automatically going to fill it in, but I'm going to lose the color that I was working with, and that's not necessarily what I want. I still want it to be pink, I just want to add this texture on top of it. So in order to modify this so I can fit the color of it, here's what we need to do. Notice that as I click on it, it will add those swatches to my basic swatch panel. If I double click, in this case on burlap, this will open up an editor mode. And this will allow me to edit the pattern that I have. Notice I've got a little panel that opens up with this. I don't necessarily want to change this up. Instead, I'm going to choose my rectangle tool again, and I'm going to send a rectangle of pink behind the entire thing. So as I drew off that pink, you can see it quickly filled it in. And I'm going to go up to Object and send it to the back, and now I've got that pink nice and behind it. Hey, if I wanted to change up the color of all of these different lines, here's where I can maybe select everything except for the pink background. And I can go over to my swatches, and let's make these, instead of being black, I'll set them to be something slightly different. Let's do maybe a dark purple or a blue. Let's go for a light blue. Once I change up the style of my Illustrator pattern, I can do Done, or I could have saved it as a copy. And now you can see that pattern is repeating itself inside of here as a solid color along with what I have. Not saying I like this, but that's another way of adding some texture to an otherwise bland, boring design. So adding texture is one thing that I want to see you use this week within your design. In Photoshop, it allows you to quickly and easily add pictures. In Illustrator, it allows you to add vector patterns to your overall work.